Yes, it's been an interesting year for me, really. Rathlin Energy, as I'm sure most of you know, finally caught up with me. And they did drag me into court eventually last December 23rd, which has added to my education over the last few months. But I'll touch on that a little bit later. I'm not going to dwell on it too much, because I really want to focus on what's coming up now on June 23rd with the charade of an EU election. I mean, this is going to be as much of a charade as the previous referendums in Ireland, France, and Netherlands. And of course, in France and the Netherlands, basically the overwhelming decision by the populace was to get out of the EU. And in both cases, the government said, well, thanks for letting us know what you think, but we don't really care because we're not going to take any notice of it anyway. At least in Ireland, and there's a particular Irishman that, in my opinion, should be, the name of this Irishman should be on the lips of every Irishman, and that is, it's not Thomas Sheridan. Well, it probably should be. But has anybody heard the name Raymond Crotty? Yeah, Raymond Crotty. It's because of Raymond Crotty that the Irish actually had the opportunity for referenda. Because back in the 1970s, the Irish government were about to railroad the Irish people into the EU, right into the heart of the EU. And they were so certain of this that their corrupt politicians sold Irish oil reserves. In fact, they didn't sell them, they gave them away. They gave them away. And they sold the 19% of the 23% of the fishing rights. So Ireland, because of where Ireland sits, Ireland actually has 23% of EU fishing waters as part of its territory. And they were sold to the EU, 19% of that 23%. So 80% of Ireland's fishing rights were sold to the EU for a one-off payment of the equivalent of €6 billion. And the reason they did this is because they were convinced that they were basically just going to hand over Ireland to the EU. But Raymond Crotty came along. Now, Raymond Crotty is a very interesting guy. He was a Kilkenny farmer. And he had seen how outrageous the EU was and how it was destroying Irish farming. Because what it was doing was encouraging Irish farmers not to farm. Because by not farming or by manipulating their farming, they could get outrageous sums of money in EU subsidies. And he writes about how the farmers used to get the EU farming inspectors along in the morning, and they show them a field of sheep, and then they take them down the pub for half a dozen Guinnesses. And while they were down the pub, their wives would move the sheep into another field. And they'd get a subsidy, for all of the sheep they had. And they'd do the same again in the evening. They'd have to go down the pub. And so Raymond Crotty could see what this was doing. It was destroying Irish farming because it was literally discouraging the farmers from farming and just literally living high on the hog on the subsidy. So Crotty realised what was going on with the Irish government, so he took them to court and he sued them on the basis that it was written in the Irish Constitution that the Irish government could not give away Irish sovereignty without the full permission of the people. And in the first case, he lost. And in fact, the case, ironically, was decided on the 23rd of December. I think it was 1979. And he thought he was bankrupt. But he was working with a very good lawyer who picked up something in the judge's summing up, which gave him the opportunity to submit an appeal. And in the appeal, Raymond Crotty won the appeal. And basically that meant that what was then enshrined in the then Irish Constitution was that the Irish government could not hand over any sovereignty without the full permission of the Irish people. And that's why they had referenda. Now, Raymond Crotty knew that as a Kilkenny farmer, no one was ever going to take any notice of him. So what he did was he actually went and studied agricultural economics. And in his latter life, he became highly regarded as an economist in agricultural economics, but not in Ireland. Not in Ireland. That's why no one's ever heard of him. He worked in the Far East. He worked in South America. And sadly, of course, the final referendum occurred shortly after his death, and he'd be turning in his grave because that referendum, the vote was manipulated, clearly manipulated. There is clear evidence of manipulation through stuffed ballot boxes turning up at polling stations without police escort, or police actually turning up with ballot boxes that weren't sealed. So massive manipulation. So do we think it's going to be any different here? I mean, there wasn't any fraud in the last... Oh, yeah, there was. Oh, yeah, and Cameron is now trying to dodge this, or the Conservative Party are trying to dodge this, and they'll find something to take it off the front pages of the news. Now, we're heading towards a manipulated result. There's no doubt about that in my mind. And I'm pretty sure that I have a good sense as to how that's going to be manipulated, and it's not perhaps how people think. I hope I'm wrong, but we'll see how that unfolds. So let's just take a look at this, what's going on in this country at the moment, because I know there are enormous pressures and potential incentives for people to vote to remain in the EU. And I completely understand that. I mean, but forgive me, but this is like rat poison. You know, it's the 97% sugar in rat poison that is there to lure the rats to the cyanide. You know, the remaining 2-3% of cyanide, which will actually do the damage. And that's what really is occurring, you know, right now. Now, last year, I think I asked the question in the presentation, how many people are proud to be British? And I'm not going to bother asking the question this year, because I've asked that a number of times over the course of the year, and I haven't had a single person put their hand up, which I think really says a lot, because we know something's wrong. We know something is wrong right in the soul of not just this country, but the world right now, but every other country. Anybody recognize what this is? No, it's not my caravan. Door's not that big. Anyone recognize this? Eviction. It is an eviction. Anyone know which eviction? This is a lady by the name of May Appleton. This is the bailiffs making sure that she can't re-enter her home. And this is May Appleton with one of her 3 sons. An 82-year-old lady. One of the reasons, and by the way, this is an EU directive, that all public services are privatised. It's an EU directive. This is why social housing is being privatised. One of the benefits for the sociopathic corporatists of privatisation is that the private companies are not subject to the Freedom of Information Act. And so by offloading social housing to private companies, it means the private companies can basically do what the hell they want. That's why we're seeing, you know, what remains of social housing deteriorating, because the companies are not motivated to do any kind of proper maintenance. And they literally will just bodge. They bodge. Whilst the chief executive officers of these companies, like all chief executive officers, earn outrageous salaries. Now, she was evicted along with her 3 sons because she and her 3 sons were hoarders. Now, when I say hoarders, there was a problem, because you're looking at the photographs from the inside of the house, it was literally a maze of corridors through all the stuff that had been hoarded. And the housing company, Weaver Vale, made the decision that they had tried everything to get the family to respond to their efforts to get them to reduce the amount of fire hazard in the property, but they'd exhausted all other avenues, and so they had to evict. Fortunately, the pressure in Manchester, because this is in a Manchester suburb, the pressure was enormous on this lady, Judith Burbidge. This is her team, West Cheshire Homes, Weaver Vale Housing Trust. And the pressure was enormous, and by the following Tuesday, they had relented and stated that the family could move back in the house after some of the material had been removed. Now, I don't care how bad the problem was. This is a massive failure on the part of the company that's responsible for social housing, that they weren't able to address it in any other way other than an eviction. This is absolutely outrageous. Now, the good news is that the eviction process is becoming more and more under scrutiny. And there are groups all around the country now that are ready to be on call and turn up and help any family or any individual that is under threat of eviction. But the number of evictions are increasing at a phenomenal rate because the ultimate goal is gentrification. And we've seen that through the weekend. You know, the gentrification of London, is gathering pace at a phenomenal rate. You know, I don't know how these people in London ever think they're going to find the people to actually carry out the basic services. You know, so it's going to implode on them at some point. Because if you're on minimum wage or living wage or a 0 hours contract, you can't afford to live anywhere near London. So, you know, one day they're just going to wake up to a complete pile of trash because there's nobody there to collect it.
It's all in Westminster at the minute.
Yeah, inside. And, is there anyone in any doubt about government policy? No. You know, if you are not making a direct contribution to the corporatocracy, because you're on that hamster wheel, debt boy, you're on that hamster wheel, so you have to find a way to service that debt. So therefore, you are effectively enslaved to the corporatocracy, and you're servicing their basic needs. So that's fine. But the moment that you're not able to contribute to the corporatocracy, then you are surplus to requirements. You're surplus to requirements. You know, Max was, showing us the very graphic pictures, and rightly so that we never forget what's going on. Literally just 4 hours, 5 hours flying time from here. But at the same time, there are similar atrocities going on in this country, soft atrocities, if there's such a term. You know, Ian Duncan Smith is probably the biggest mass murderer at large in this country right now. And what are we doing about it? Nada. And now they've put a Welsh, I can't even remember his name, the Welsh guy. Crab, thank you, yeah. Is that something he suffers from? Stephen Crab, yes. Who's taken over. So they bring in somebody who's from a council house background, put him into the role. Do you think he would have been put into that role unless he absolutely signed up to the agenda? Of course not. But it just takes a little bit the heat off of Ian Duncan Smith. And of course, what a wonderful PR coup. So he's able to extricate himself by supposedly being a man of integrity and offering his resignation because he couldn't support the government's further agenda to reduce benefits to the disabled. This is straight out of the Nazi National Socialist playbook because they never went away. They're still here. The EU was a national socialist dream. They effectively initiated, although the blueprints were pre-National Socialism in Germany, but basically the agenda was accelerated through National Socialism. Then it went underground until 1957, May 15th, I think it was, 1957, with the Treaty of Rome. And since then, this agenda has been pursued at a phenomenal rate. And part of that agenda is literally the eradication of anyone who is not able or willing to contribute to the corporatocracy. You are surplus to requirements. In the sensitive words of Henry Kissinger, they are useless eaters. And this is going on, and we let it. So to some extent, and you have to take this in context, so to some extent, when we are bombarded in the media, or even the alternative media, with the pictures of atrocities of what's occurring elsewhere, it does a pretty damn good job of taking our attention away from what's going on right under our noses. And this is a list, by the way, of all the MPs who voted in favour of reducing the benefits of disabled people. And of course, they're looking for more and more creative ways of not only growing the underclass in the short term, but then, of course, wiping them out. And we heard Kai's account last night of what happened with his mother. These are the sociopaths who have all prostituted their souls in return for whatever it is they think they can get. And some of them will even try and justify it on the basis of, well, that's politics. I had to agree to support this policy so that I could get the hospital built in my community or the community centre built or whatever. It's the compromise. Well, these socio-psychopaths, well, they're not all psychopaths, but they're certainly sociopaths. Whilst they're doing this, of course, they are coining it on expenses. This is not even salary. This is expenses. This is the expenses that were claimed by MPs between December 2014 and November 2015, 12 months. A total of £103.4 million. An average of £3,059 per week by every MP.
That's worth a round of applause.
Does that include their secretary's wages, though?
Yeah. Part of it is staff, right? But they are coining it. And a lot of these people, they are paying their families. They're paying their wives or their daughters, to do secretarial work. Give me a break. The reality is that any independent audit, I think, would very quickly establish that this is fraud. Yeah, my wife's she's doing 20 hours a week answering the phone. Yeah, there's no record. There's no need to provide any evidence of that. One example of an MP who, in my opinion, has prostituted themselves and sold their soul, despite going into Parliament with absolute altruistic intent. And that's Dr. Sarah Wollaston from Totnes. She got into Parliament in 2010 after the previous incumbent in the South Hams constituency was evicted by his local party because of his fraud on expenses. Now, you remember that? The run-up, in fact, it was 2009, there was the massive expose of all the MPs who had fraudulently claimed outrageous sums of money over the previous decade plus. Remember that? Yeah. That was a year before the 2010 election, which gave the local parties the opportunity to deselect those that had been proven to be claiming fraudulent expenses. Do you know what the purpose of that was? That was an ace that had been over a decade in the making. That scandal broke in late March, early April 2009. And it was timed perfectly to take all debate out of the mainstream media on the impact of the forthcoming EU elections, or lack of impact, I should say. But there was no debate in the mainstream media about the EU. I mean, every time an EU election comes around, there should obviously be the opportunity to have the debate of what this really means, what this relationship between the UK and the EU and Brussels is really all about. But they certainly didn't want any open discussion and open debate, so let's take it out of the mainstream media by putting up this, or creating this expenses scandal. And of course, most of the MPs had been lured into it over the years. Yeah, no, we know you're not happy with it. We know, it might be a little bit difficult, but it's okay because it's legal. You're still playing by the rules. Well, Sarah Wollaston, in that period, 1 year, claimed 170,000. In the previous parliament, from 2010 until 2015, she claimed an average of 35,000 a year. Just 35,000 a year. And then she got re-elected in 2015, and she went, oh, well, fuck it. Might as well just milk it. This is completely outrageous. 3,000 a week? 3,000 a week? I mean, I know people, who live on probably not much more than that in a year. In a year. Because that's still 60 quid a week. 60 quid a week. Unbelievable. How's it going to be manipulated? In the same way that the Scottish elections. The Scottish elections. Can anybody believe the Tories came second? I mean, give me a break. The Tories have never, ever come anywhere near second in any Scottish election. It's either been the SNP the last few years or it's been a Labour stronghold. But, there were some things, obviously, that the Tories wanted to make sure that Nicola Sturgeon stayed on point with, and so they needed to manipulate the result. Now, I must confess that I thought they had Nicola Sturgeon right where they wanted her, and that they were quite relaxed to give Nicola Sturgeon the majority that she craved. But obviously, there's some things that they do want to keep tabs on, so they had to manipulate the result and make sure that the Tories came second. Do you know how they did that? Any idea? Postal votes. And who runs the postal vote system? Oh, Peter Lilly. That's why Ruth Davison, the leader of the Scottish Conservative Party, announced the result before the result was announced in the last Scottish elections, because she'd obviously got a bit of the inside track from Peter Lilly, and she got the timing wrong, a bit like the BBC on 9/11. Got the timing wrong and announced the result before the result was announced, officially. So Peter Lilly, yes, he runs this, or is very closely associated with IDOX, IDOX, and this is the company that manipulates the outcome of elections through postal votes. And I'll give you an example. I mean, the postal votes across the UK in 2015 were a greater percentage than ever before. Now, I know Eastbourne, as a classic example. Eastbourne, I know it's God's waiting room, right? Yeah, literally the last resort. Anybody from Eastbourne? I should have asked that question first, of course. But in Eastbourne, I mean, yes, there are a lot of nursing homes, but 37% of the vote, postal vote, I don't think so. I don't think so. And we've encouraged people, because of course you can only get this information if you are resident in a particular constituency. So we've been encouraging people to try and glean this information. Each time we get the information, the postal vote count is sometimes shocking, particularly if it was in any way or seen as a risk that the Tories might actually lose the seat. So you remember in that election, of course, no one was expecting the Tories to get a majority, 2015, but somehow they did, and it's postal votes. And postal votes were introduced in this country. It's always been postal votes, but the system was opened up for the 2005 election. And of course, this was the election when Tony Blair was at the pits of his popularity, if that was possible. And, this is after taking us into the illegal wars of Afghanistan and more particularly Iraq. So he's at the bottom of his popularity, and what the establishment did not want to run the risk of is a dead duck prime minister, or even a prime minister that actually just didn't get elected. So what they did, changed the postal vote system, stuffed the Sedgefield constituency ballot with a whole bunch of other candidates to sort of split off the opposition vote and minimise that. So Tony Blair, at the bottom of his popularity, gets a bigger majority than he did in the previous election. Postal votes. Now, call it a hunch, but Sedgefield isn't the type of constituency where you have a sort of massive itinerant community or international community. The vast majority of people who reside in Sedgefield live and work locally, so why would they need the postal vote? Unless it was for the manipulation. And the establishment always have ways of telling you that they have manipulated something. It's not obviously spelt out in words of one syllable, but you just have to, keep looking, keep digging, and eventually it just jumps out at you. Well, here's the one that will jump out at you. If you go to the government website and the official statistics for Sedgefield in 2005, you will find that the number of registered voters in Sedgefield for the election in 2005 was 66,666. That's how they do it. Now, it's going to be interesting to see whether or not the Tory vote in Scotland actually prevents the most outrageous piece of legislation that I have ever seen drafted in any civilized, sorry Scots, country. And that is the named person scheme. Or as Mel Kelly, who's a wonderful Scottish activist, Mel Kelly calls it the named pervert scheme. And that's because in the first case of one of the state's named persons, it was established that person had already had a track record of sexual abuse of minors. As of August the 1st, this year, every child in Scotland will have a state guardian appointed. And Nicola Sturgeon, in the recent Scottish SNP conference, said, oh, no, we know there's a lot of opposition to it, and if parents want to opt out, that's absolutely fine. But of course, classic political speak, parents can opt out. In fact, we'd like the parents to opt out because that way we can just have direct access to your kids. And what kind of decisions are they going to be involved in? Everything. Everything. And of course, every kind of question's been asked and every kind of response has been obfuscation. But I'll give you an example, vaccinations. It's been made very clear that the state guardian will be expected to participate in the discussion on the well-being and healthcare of the child. And it doesn't start at the birth. It starts at the fetus stage. So the moment that a woman in Scotland from August the 1st goes to her GP and basically he confirms that she's pregnant, a state guardian will be appointed. And what's now been established is that the state guardian will actually have a decision over whether or not the person keeps that child. Not just in terms of, an abortion because they don't want the child, but in terms of if anything happens to the fetus during the term of pregnancy, because the state is going to decide whether or not it wants the woman to go full term so they can use the stillbirth for research or the damaged fetus for organs or whatever, other material. I mean, this is something straight out of the 1930s and the eugenics agenda. But, of course, the eugenics agenda originated in the US, funded by the Rockefeller Foundation. It just got more traction with the National Socialists, so they moved their focus to Germany. But here it is, manifesting once again. And the Daily Mail runs a lot of actually very interesting and, dare I say, almost alternative articles. But you never see them in the printed version. They're always on the online version. And this is from the Daily Mail, 5th of March this year. NHS to harvest babies' organs. Ghoulish proposal gives mothers pregnant with a damaged fetus an agonising choice. Abort the dying child to give birth so body parts can be used for transplants. This applies to Scotland only at the moment. Scotland is the experiment. 80% of the Scottish population live in the Central Belt. That's the Central Belt that is becoming the most surveilled landmass on the planet. The smart cities, and Pippa King, of course, gave the outstanding presentation at AV6 on the smart agenda and the smart cities and how Glasgow is now the most surveilled city on the planet. And Edinburgh coming a close second, and then they'll just bring the technology to meet with the two. It's under threat from the unconventional gas industry, and Jim Ratcliffe of INEOS, who wants to basically frack the whole of that central belt. So one way or another, basically, as far as I'm concerned, if you're anyone here from Scotland? Yeah? Move. Move. Or get involved. Because if you don't, this isn't coming from me. The scripts are there. The scripts are out there. You know very well what's going to happen. And it's exactly as we discussed, I think, on Saturday. That basically, the script's out there, and if we do nothing, that's us giving them a mandate to pursue that particular agenda. And they're getting more and more brazen about this as the apathy appears to be increasing. So yeah, this is the graphics from that Daily Mail online article. This is a comment from that article. It said, new breed of members of Scottish Parliament desperate to give the state ownership of everyone's organs from birth. The SNP said they will put forward their own bill after the election, so that they all plan to do it together. Next to the unborn child organs as the named person and their right to change abortion law gives them the responsibility of harvesting the unborn and the living's organs. After all, they are desperate to participate further in the global organ trade, with NHS already caught sending organs abroad. The Daily Mail. It's mainstream, almost, except it didn't appear in print. It's unbelievable, isn't it? You know, it's like even if I was talking about something going on in Germany or Chile, you still go, oh my God. But it's our country. Our country. Which, of course, is slowly being removed from us. So, we're coming up to the EU referendum. EU referendum. Okay, straw poll. Anyone brave enough to say you want to stay in? The rat poison. I know there's some great reasons for staying in. You know, from the environmental standpoint, from the European Convention on Human Rights standpoint. You know, I use these things in my recent appearances in court. You know, I'm not going to not use them while I have the opportunity. But it's the sugar coating on the cyanide. Now, it is going to be manipulated, that's for sure. You know, there's not one shadow of doubt about that. But the key element of this, anybody who says that, you know, we should stay in, and like I said, you know, I understand if you just look at the surface elements, there's a lot of potentially, apparently, good reasons for staying in. But who sets the EU legislation? Who sets the EU legislation? Huh? See, we're not sure, are we? How long have we been in the EU? Too long. Since Edward Heath lied to the people of the country in 73 and 4 about the potential of joining the European Economic Community. I was 18. It was my first opportunity to vote. And I thought, this is great. This is a great opportunity to be part of something bigger. It's your fault. It's my fault. Because we got in by just one vote, and it was my vote. I fell for it hook, line, and sinker with my superficial analysis, i.e. none, of what this really entailed back in 1975 when we had the vote. But, 40-odd years on, we really haven't got too much excuse, and the information is a lot more readily available. The reality is that the legislation in the EU comes from a multiple range of sources. Officially, it comes from the Council of Ministers. Down through, because even the commissioners, listen to what Tony Blair has to say about the role of the commissioner and the inability of the commissioner to be able to initiate the process of new legislation. Actually, where it originates from is the bureaucrats. The bureaucrats, the faceless people in Brussels and Strasbourg who create the legislation, their pet legislation, often on behalf of powerful lobbyists, and they know the channels by which to get the Council of Ministers to rubber stamp the approval process. How many pieces of legislation, EU legislation, have been initiated since Britain was lured into the EU in 1975? Good guess. Keep going. Keep going. Yeah, 122,000 pieces of legislation. How many of those have been put on the British statute books since 1975? How many? 45, no, 45 is closer. No, the reality is that about 20,000 of the 122,000 pieces of legislation have got onto the statute books. Why? Because we haven't got enough civil servants to rubber stamp them. And that's the only reason they're not in the UK statute books, is because they're not rubber stamped. But ostensibly, because EU law effectively has supremacy over UK law, the fact that it hasn't been stamped into UK law yet is almost an irrelevance. And yet, we're not told this, are we, really? No? Why do you think that Parliament is empty for the entire week except for 12 noon on a Wednesday? And the only time people make the effort to go to Parliament is 12 noon on Wednesday, because they know that on 12 noon on Wednesday, a significant chunk of the population, a few percentage points, watch the media coverage of Prime Minister's questions, the zoo. But the rest of the week, you're lucky if there's half a dozen people actually in the chamber. It's a charade, a total charade for the masses, that's all, just to keep the masses thinking that there is some kind of democratic process in this country. Europe is an agenda. It's a long-standing agenda. It's an agenda that is now almost 100 years old, almost exactly 100 years old, because we can actually trace it back to the 1920s. And this is the guy, and in fact, I think it was Max that mentioned this guy in his presentation. This is Count Coudenhove-Kalerghi, who wrote a number of books in the immediate years post First World War. He's an Austrian count. And I'll paraphrase, but the primary template is a book called Pan-Europa. And basically, his game plan was to destroy the homogeneity of Europe, to destroy the nation states of Europe. And what he said was that you should destroy the mass population, reduce their education to a minimal level, and create a mongoloid European state ruled by the traditional aristocracy and the spiritual elite. And I have quoted that last sentence. The traditional aristocracy and the spiritual elite. Who do you think he was referring to when he referred to the spiritual elite? The Zionists, ostensibly at that time. The Zionists. That's who he was referring to. And of course, the Zionist agenda had been established by Theodor Herzl about 35 years previously. Count Coudenhove-Kalerghi. So yeah, this is a guy who writes a book. Yeah, it's just a book. You know, doesn't have any basis in current policy. Well, let me just introduce you to Peter Sutherland. Anybody come across this sociopath? He's an Irishman by accident at birth. I'm amazed that... where's our pyromaniacs? This is the guy, he was the youngest Attorney General of Ireland. That launched his political career. He then went on to become an EU commissioner. He chaired the GATT talks in the early 90s. He was the founding Director General of the World Trade Council. And he was chairman of BP, chairman of Goldman, he's still chairman of Goldman Sachs International. He was on the board of Royal Bank of Scotland when it collapsed. I mean, this guy, you know, the interconnectivity is just something else. But he is also responsible for advising member countries of the EU on immigration. And this is a quote from an interview that he gave to the BBC on June 21st, 2012. And he said the EU should do its best to undermine the homogeneity of its member states. Peter Sutherland told peers the future prosperity of many EU states depends on them becoming multicultural. He also suggests the UK government's immigration policy has no basis in international law. Basically, open your doors and let them all in. Well,
Who was he speaking to at that point?
the House of Lords. So we still nurse a sense of our homogeneity and difference from others. And that's precisely what the European Union, in my view, should be doing its best to undermine. He destroyed Ireland. This is the guy who wasn't physically present, but he was behind the meeting that took place between Brian Cowen, Brian Lenihan, and the Attorney General, the head of AIB, the Bank of Ireland, on September 28th, I think it was, 2008, where he effectively instructed the Irish government to underwrite all the assets and liabilities of the Irish banks, effectively condemning the state to bankruptcy. That was his job. Yeah? And this is what he had to do. He had to destroy his own country to establish his loyalty. So it comes back to what I say. These guys, they work on the basis that the more they do to further the agenda, then the higher up the pecking order they come back when they reincarnate in their perverse belief system. Let's get a bit closer to home, though. Peter Mandelson openly stating, immigrants, we sent out search parties to get them to come and made it hard for Britons to get work. CEOs love this because it means that they can reduce their employee costs. Once upon a time, employee costs, particularly in the manufacturing business, would average about 25 to 30% of total revenue. So it was the biggest single outgoing for a manufacturing company. Automation, of course, has helped to reduce that, but so has availability of labor. Minimum wage and 0 hours contract. Both are abominations. I saw a statistic just 2 days ago from the Institute of Directors that said that for every 100 immigrants that get work in this country, 25 UK nationals are put out of work. Now, this is not a one-dimensional issue by any stretch of the imagination. Don't get me wrong. We have created, we, the collective we, have created a horrendous mess in the Middle East, an area that I love. I lived there for 4 years in the early 90s, traveled extensively. My territory was everything between Egypt in the southwest and Iran in the northeast. Wonderful people, wonderful cultures. And we have allowed our governments to destroy these cultures. And they're not going to stop anytime soon. So we have a responsibility to the people that we're bombing out of their homes. But that doesn't mean to say that we should open the doors. There's other ways to deal with responsibility. And we've always had immigration. We've always had people from other countries coming into this country on a needs basis, where there's been jobs or skills that we don't have in this country that we've needed to bring in from outside. Absolutely. That's part of, transfer of knowledge, transfer of skills, and, our own broader education. When I went and lived in these countries, I took it as an opportunity to experience the culture. I didn't try and change the culture. Neither did I embed myself in it. I didn't actually wear the dish dash, in the UAE. Didn't have one my colour. But it didn't mean to say I had to embed myself in the culture, but, the two could coexist. I had something that they wanted, and in return, I got to live a pretty nice lifestyle out there. But then it was time for me to leave. I will also readily acknowledge there were things that you had to do this to live in the Middle East. Their policy of using third country nationals for a lot of the construction work, no health and safety practices, You see the Indians and the Pakistanis and the Filipinos climbing up to build these buildings on bamboo scaffolding in bare feet, no hard hats. And just as a contract had finished and the prime contractor, the local partner, would be responsible for paying for all of the airfares to ship these people home, there'd be a terrible, horrendous fire in the shanty towns where these people lived in the desert. It's not all pretty, for sure. But at the end of the day, I was a guest. I was a guest in that country. And if I didn't like it, I could leave. Well, ultimately, I did. But I'm not suggesting that everything is wonderful, but does it give us the right to bomb these cultures into the Stone Age? I don't think so. This is a deliberate policy to destroy EU nation states, to destroy national homogeneity, to mongrelize Europe, exactly as spelled out by Kalerghi in 1920. In the EU, there is a Coudenhove-Kalerghi award that is given to the politician that is deemed to have done the most to further this policy of undermining EU national homogeneity. You want to guess who have been a few of the winners of this? Who? Merkel, yes. Yes. Blair, yes. Peter Sutherland, twice. Yeah, it doesn't take a rocket scientist, does it? And did we see this on the front pages of the national press? Tony Blair awarded Coudenhove-Kalerghi Award. No, of course not. Of course not. So we've got to find a balance. So what's going to happen on the 23rd? Well, we're going to take time out of work. Who's going to vote? Yeah, okay. Listen, I actually believe my counsel on this is that we have to vote. Let's not make it easy for them, right? If we don't participate in the process, then once again, we're just handing it to them on a plate. They don't care why we don't participate. They don't care why we don't vote as long as we don't. If everybody who didn't vote in the last 2 elections had voted for the same party, that party would now be in power. It's a party that doesn't exist, obviously. But that's the magnitude of the apathy in this country, or the conscious decision. And I do understand some people's conscious decision not to vote. And I readily acknowledge that I'm open to be labelled a hypocrite because I'm not on an electoral register because I don't have a fixed address. But if you are on an electoral register, then vote. Don't make it easy for them. Let's make it more difficult for them to manipulate so that the manipulation becomes more obvious. And then more people will actually see what's occurring. So a lot of people believe that the manipulation is going to be to keep us in. And that may well be an outcome. I certainly haven't read the definitive script on this. That may well be an outcome. And if that is the case, we have a big problem. We have a real problem. Because that will be the first time since 1975 that the British people will have effectively given the British government a mandate to basically say, let's not pussyfoot around anymore, let's go the whole hog. And that whole hog is going to be unfolded at a phenomenal rate of knots. But I'm not sure that that's going to happen. I don't think that's enough for these sociopaths who want the European superstate and want the destruction of the national homogeneity of the European countries. So I will not be at all surprised if the ballot is either let go as we think it might unfold, i.e. that the vote is to come out, or that it is manipulated to bring us out. So what will be the purpose of that? Because people go, yes, we need to come out. Okay. Problem there is that then this government will no longer be constrained by any of that sugarcoating that's in the EU legislation that we are using today. And I suspect that the opportunity through things like the Extremism Act, it's a bill now, but it will be an act, will be used to wipe out, shut down, incarcerate any dissent in this country. if we come out after the June ballot, there is a very good possibility that this country will be deliberately destroyed. The purpose being to create a situation where in, let's say, 7 to 10 years, the population of this country are gagging to get back in. And at that point, it'll be a case of, okay, well, you can come back in, but this time it will be on our terms. You will subjugate the nation state in totality. Apart from the City of London, of course. Now, they, of course, will be relying at that point on a continued non-participation. So if that is the prognosis, there will be a massive responsibility on the people of this country to take their country back. And that I'm not suggesting, this is not a far right take the country back. This is bring sanity to the country, sanity to an economic policy, sanity to a financial strategy, effectively do an Iceland. I mean, how sad is that? You know, we got a country that's 300,000 people, and basically, you know, that's the country that's really the model. It's set up the model financial system. It's outside, or slowly being clawed back already, but it's outside of the global central banking system. So once we're out, you know, we've got a hell of a lot of work to do. Hell of a lot of work. Because if we just do sit back and go, oh, thank God we're out, believe you me, it's not going to be pretty. Does this sound plausible? Yeah. So, again, it comes down to sowing the seeds. Yes, we do have to come out. In my opinion, we do have to come out. Because if we don't come out, then we have gifted. We've been lured by the sugarcoating, and then we'll effectively end up in the same situation as Greece and Ireland and Spain and Portugal. And if we think we've got austerity in this country right now, we ain't seen nothing yet. We ain't seen nothing yet. Now, I just want to throw in something on the immigration debate. Because let me just ask you a question. How many people here create a hypothetical country? Hypothetical country. Let's say that country had an economy where a bus driver could earn something in the region of about £3,000 a week. Who'd be up for that? Yeah, who would consider emigrating or even just going abroad for a couple of years on their own, leave the family at home, because they could earn £3,000 plus a week as a bus driver? Yeah? Okay, £12,000 a month, £144,000 a year. That's about 6.5, 7 times the average national wage in this country, which is about £22,500, allegedly. Well, but that's why we have a massive immigration issue. Because for people who live in a lot of the developing nations, African nations, Middle Eastern nations, to come here and get a job as, say, a bus driver, they're earning the equivalent of 6 and 7 times what they can earn in their own country. So, of course, they're going to make an effort to come here. Who can blame them for that? You know? Of course. So, I don't hold anything against those individuals for wanting to better the lives of themselves and their families, because we would do the same if we had the same opportunity in this fictional country. So, of course, they're going to come here. And if we open the borders completely, then I could assure you that, you know, we've got a situation at the moment where more people are earning minimum wage or are on 0 hours contracts than ever since records began. But if we go into the EU on a fully fledged basis, it's going to grow exponentially. And what you're going to have is a massive distortion in the earnings. So you're going to have your CEOs and the officers of companies who are going to probably double, treble what they're already earning, because the profitability of the company will go exponential because they're able to reduce all their employee costs and associated costs with that. So how are you going to vote? Do vote, though. Don't tell me how you... Do vote. If you have the opportunity to vote, please do vote. The Kalerghi plan. And of course, we have all of the manipulation. And notice the colors here. Notice the colors. The red, white, and blue. I mean, obviously, this was classic PR. It is a tragedy. There's no question. It's a tragedy. It's a tragedy of our creation. But it's being used to undermine everything about our lives. This is a game of global monopoly. And I've, showed these pics on many presentations. This, of course, is from Brick Lane in 2012. A wonderful piece of street art. The global banksters playing their game Monopoly on the backs of humanity. Meanwhile, they create this massive public debt. To whom? To whom? The banksters, yeah. It's fake debt. And, here it is. Spelt out for us, isn't it? You've all seen this by now, haven't you? This was the artwork that was used in France, in the Netherlands, and in Ireland, on the bus shelters, on the posters, on the street, to promote membership of the EU. Yet, on careful examination, what do we see? Here's the inner sanctum, the Tower of Babel. Yeah. Mirroring, of course, Strasbourg. Yeah. Here we have the sociopaths, those who have prostituted themselves, those who, in return for the trinkets, in return for the titles, in return for the lifestyle, will do whatever it is that they're asked to do. Would they sell their mother? Would they kill their youngest child? Oh, maybe they have. Gordon Brown, David Cameron. Looking longingly across, what have we got to do to get in the inner sanctum? They'll never get in there. They'll never get in there. It doesn't matter what they do. They will never get in there. There's no word in the English language, well, no polite word, to describe these guys. But the National Socialists had the term Capo, Kampfpolizei. In the ghettos, they appointed senior members of the community to administer the ghetto, to be responsible for the allocation of housing, for food, and of course for providing the lists for transshipment to the work camps and whatever else. And yet, when the ghetto was emptied, where did they go? Yeah, they were on the last truck out. They went the same way, because those in the inner sanctum treat these people, I believe, with even more contempt than the masses. But here we have the masses depicted, and you can see how they're depicted, yeah? The blockheads, they're all depicted as blockheads, except one, the baby. The baby here is the only one with any kind of normal features. The blockheads telling us what they're doing. Their goal is to make sure that by the time any human entering this physical realm, by the time they get to young adulthood, they're a blockhead. They are literally a slave to the system, cannon or factory fodder. It's all out there, spelt out. Now, I, for one, am certainly not proud of the legacy that we are leaving for future generations. It is an absurdity, the corporatocracy. And it's spelt out for us. Many people have tried to spell it out. The establishment is walking us in to the barcode in every way, shape, or form. And as has been discussed through the weekend, they're literally trying to completely shut down any understanding or access to the right brain. Holly touched it. Holly referenced Tony Wright. Amazing guy. In fact, I have to have Tony Wright to speak at a future AV event. And if you haven't read Tony Wright's book, Left in the Dark, I absolutely recommend this book. Left in the Dark. And what Tony's really working on is his research into the efforts made by the establishment to completely lock us in to the left hemisphere of our brain and shut down the right hemisphere. The left hemisphere, of course, is that transmitter-receiver that is very limited in its frequency bandwidth and locks us into this three-dimensional charade and completely shuts down our capacity to connect with everything on the wider scale. And once we are able to cross the corpus callosum, and the more time we're able to spend in the right side of the brain, the more of a problem we are to the establishment. So we have it all to play for. We really do, not for ourselves, but for future generations. And at the same time, I do relate to what Zen said last night. In the scheme of things, it doesn't matter. It will be what it will be. But does that mean to say that we just sit back and... Because if we don't get it right this time, if we don't sort it out this time, guess what? You're coming back. And you want to do this again? So let's make the effort, and really try to bring about the changes that we all know we need to see, but without the existential attachment. Because the moment that you do have that existential attachment, then you're limiting the potential outcome. There's a wonderful quote from David Monk in my documentary, Voices from the Gas Fields.
If at this point in time you can stand in front of a drill rig and stop it from getting on, the easiest drill rig to stop's the first one. The hardest one will be the 10,000th. It'll be more than that though in the UK, because you're doing shale over there predominantly. Shale needs a lot of wells, leads a lot of destruction, poisons a lot of water.
If this gets the tiniest foothold, you're done. So it's now or it's never. Don't think that you've got that long, because it's now or never. So you do it now, you stand up now, and you find something within yourself that you didn't think was there. That's the important thing. You will be confronted by police. They wear their Kevlar suits and it's a big intimidation thing.
Hey, you've got nobody in front of you. Keep walking. You're delaying this lady. Keep going. Don't push back on her. Keep moving. Now.
If you've got to
Keep going.
the officer, keep moving, please.
It's up to the people of the UK to get their cameras in the face of the Kevlar security, the Kevlar police who are paid by the corporations. And we have to say no. That's all it is. But it's more than just saying no at a meeting. It's intent. It's the intent of no. It's the knowing that you mean no. That's when you will be unbelievably powerful. You come out in numbers. If they see your grandmother and the mother and the child come out and say, we are not going to accept this, then they are finished. But that's what it takes. Don't sit back and think that anybody's looking out for you. It's you.
Where he makes the observation, he says, you come out in numbers. If they see your grandmother and the mother and the child come out and say, we're not going to accept this, then they are finished. But that's what it takes. Don't sit back and think that anybody else is looking out for you. It's you. It's every one of us. And if we don't put in the effort, then we are, directly or indirectly, however you want to perceive it, making a contribution to the sociopathic global corporatist agenda of total global dominion and subjugation of humanity until such time as they're able to go through the process of transhumanism and create the droids that they need to support their system, and the rest can just disappear. Marcus Aurelius, a warrior, spirit, and philosopher of the 2nd century AD, he said, what we do in life ripples through eternity. So don't think for one moment that any action that we take is not relevant or not important. It doesn't matter how much or how little you do. Yeah, we've all got other lives that we have to take care of. We've got family responsibilities. And of course, they have to take priority. But we can all find an extra bit of time. And it doesn't matter what you choose to get involved in, because there's so many issues and none of us can get involved in everything, God forbid. So it doesn't matter what you pick up on, you know, whether it's the geoengineering, whether it's the GM foods, whether it's the unconventional gas agenda, you know, whether it's the fluoride in the water, whether it's the financial system, whether it's getting involved in the politics. I mean, go and, you know, for some people, get in there, get in among, go join your local Conservative or Labour Party, infiltrate them as they try to infiltrate us. You know, there are no rules in this game except be true to your own humanity. And you know, somebody, I think it was a golfer, who said, you know, it's really interesting. He said, you know, the more I practice, the better I seem to get. And it's the same with everything. The more you practice, if you find out that something's working, then you know you don't necessarily need to go and shout it from the rooftops, perhaps. But if you know it works, and you know that you can use that in some way, then use it. We have access to a phenomenal range of tools. We have access to a phenomenal range of creativity. The away team don't. They are actually very limited in what they can do by their own rules, by their own procedures, by their own statutes. There's way more of us than there is of them. And I absolutely know that we will come through. It's not going to be easy by any stretch of the imagination. If it was easy, then we wouldn't be here. It's a learning as well. Let's maximize this learning opportunity, because I have no idea where we take that learning, but I know we take it somewhere. And that learning is going to be extremely crucial to us and to future generations. So thank you very much for participating in AV7. Thank you.